So Sam is unable to attend today, so we will facilitate this working group meeting. My name is Adelia McGregor. I'm a senior engineering geologist with the State Water Resources Control Board, working on the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. I'm joined in the room by Lale Restigarzada, Erica Calve, Kelsey Moore, Margaret Chapney, and Cheryl Powell, and Annalisa Kahara is joining us online. We appreciate everybody's continued participation in this process. We know that it's a lot of work and a lot of time commitment. So before I hand it over for some opening remarks and introductions, I just wanted to run through some interpretation options. So we make every effort to make sure that these meetings are accessible for any Spanish language speakers. I'll run through the instructions on how to access the Spanish channel and then turn it over to my colleague, Mark, who will provide the instructions in Spanish. So if you need interpretation services, please find and click on the globe icon. That icon can be found at the bottom of your screen. If you are listening in Spanish, make sure that you click mute original audio on your screen as well. Next, I wanted to point out that there's an email address. That email address is dwq-ilrp@waterboards.ca.gov. You can email staff at this email for technical assistance, and staff will try to respond as quickly as possible. You may also email staff if you have any questions or wish to provide comment during this meeting. We also have the Q&A function, which will allow you to ask the host and co-host questions during the meeting. So now let me turn it over to Mark to run through the instructions in Spanish.
Thank you so much. We'll do that now. Muy buenas tardes a todos que nos acompañen. En español, queremos dejarles saber que tenemos interpretación a vivo disponible. Si desea escuchar el programa en español, puede buscar el icono de un globo terráqueo que aparece en la parte inferior de su pantalla. El icono dice Interpretation o Interpretación. Selecciónelo y de ahí seleccione su idioma Spanish o español y podrá escuchar y participar en el programa enteramente en su idioma. Y si desea, puede seleccionar Mute Original Audio para silenciar el audio original y así escuchar solamente la voz del intérprete. Y para asistencia técnica, escriba por favor al dwq-ilrp@waterboards.ca.gov y se le asistirá. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks, Mark. All right, so before we do quick introductions of our panelists and run through our agenda, I want to hand it over to Annalisa Kahara for opening remarks.
Thanks, Adelia. Karen Mogus, who usually provides the opening remarks for the water boards, cannot join us today, but she sends her regards. I'm Annalisa Kihara. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director in the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Board over our groundwater programs. And so I'd like to thank the panel members and the participants in this meeting for coming together, again, to work through the questions posed to the panel. I'll also share an update for you all that the team has been working hard to develop 2 data tools that will be shared with the panel early to mid next week. We're really excited about this. The first tool is a Power BI data visualization tool of all collected nitrogen data to date. And then the second is a nitrate mapping tool. So both of these were developed in response to panel requests. And we would have loved to release these tools earlier, but it took well-spent time for the water board team to clean and organize the data and to create a uniform data set and online tool. So once we release both of these tools to the panel, we will also host it on our ILRP website. So the public will also have access to the data set and data visualizations. So please stay tuned for those releases, as I mentioned, next week. And then thank you again. And I'll pass it back to you, Adelia, or to Chair Geisler.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take the role back. So before we go dive completely into the agenda, we're going to go around the virtual room and get quick introductions from our panelists. I will list you all off in the order that I see you on my screen. So if you could quickly just unmute yourselves and provide a quick introduction. So I will now hand it off to Daniel Geisler.
Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Daniel Geisler. I'm a cooperative extension specialist for nutrient management at UC Davis.
Thanks, Daniel. Next, we'll go with Ali.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ali Montazar, Irrigation and Water Management Advisor with UC Cooperative Extension.
Thanks, Ali. And next, we'll go with Gudu.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Godo Atsume. I'm a Sigma Small Farms Technical Assistance Coordinator with UCNR, part of our Small Farms Network.
Thanks, Gudu. And next, we have Ruth Dahlquist Willard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Dahlquist Willard. I'm the Interim Director of UC SWRCB, the Sustainable Agriculture and Research Education Program at UC A&R.
Thanks, Ruth. Next, we have Richard Smith.
Hello, Richard Smith, retired vegetable crop farm advisor in Monterey County.
Thank you, Richard. And next, we have Thomas Harder.
Yes, good afternoon. Thomas Harder, Professor of Cooperative Extension at University of California in Davis.
Thanks, Thomas. And next is Hannah Waterhouse.
Waterhouse, Assistant Professor at UC Santa Cruz.
All right, thank you. And I don't believe Michael Kahn is online today.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm here.
you are. All right.
Yeah, Michael Kahn, Irrigation Water Resource Farm Advisor. And I'm in Monterey County.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, panelists, for everything that you do. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at our agenda. So we want to jump in first and foremost to a continued panel discussion of the draft question responses. All the panelists have been working hard to write their draft sections and provide responses to drafts. These drafts are made available to the public prior to the meeting or on our FTP site. Instructions for how to access the FTP can be found on our website or in the revised agenda posted on our website. So as you can see here, we have many questions to go over today. We will first discuss the second draft of questions 1 and 2, and then dive into discussions of comments to the first draft for questions 3, 4, and 5, and then move into additional questions for the first draft if there is time. I will act as a gentle reminder since there is so much to cover today on time. To try to help at 4:45, we will have a discussion on the revised charter. And if you are all ready to vote today, we will have an opportunity to provide public comment on the revised charter prior to the vote. And lastly, two last things on our agenda. We will receive presentations from Eric Brennan, Anna Gomez, and Sierra today. And then, as usual, at 5:40, we will conclude with the public comment. So at this point, I think we can begin with our panel discussion, and I will hand it back to our chair, Daniel Geisler.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. So yeah, I think we can start just in the order of the questions. We have received a really nice draft from Hannah and Richard. I don't know, probably not everybody had time to look through it, but Hannah and Richard, could you give us a brief update and on the draft, and are there open questions we should discuss today as a panel? I can imagine that people or other panel members, when they read it, they may have still minor comments they can send to Sam and the water board team. But for today, are there issues you would like to discuss as a whole panel?
I want to first of all thank all the panel members for submitting, comments and edits and so forth. We got a lot of feedback, and it was very, very valuable. And there's a lot there in these two questions. So Hannah, maybe I'll just hit on a couple of things that I think are important, and then you. How does that sound? Or do you want to go first? I don't care.
No, that sounds great to me. Can I just ask one clarifying question?
Yes, please.
I know we got we got emailed all the drafts from questions 3 through 8, perhaps. Was this also emailed out to everyone? Question 1 and 2?
Yeah, yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Just
And probably if you could share it, if you have it on your screen, in case it makes sense, you decide, but maybe worth sharing it if you want to talk about specific points.
Yeah, and I'll see if I can pull this off here. I don't know why I'm not having luck doing that. Can you share it, Hannah?
Otherwise, just go ahead and then.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I wanted to do was just to draw people's attention to I mean, there was a lot of different points. But I think in my mind, the one of the important points that we made is in response to let's see, it's in response to question 1A, and it's bullet point 6. And I'm going to just read it because we worked on this section, and I think it's, you know, in responding to the question, you know, is there enough data and scientific research to set crop-specific nitrogen-related limits that are protective of groundwater quality and support a long-term sustainable irrigated lands program? And so this answer that we have here, I think is you know, very key. So I just want to read it. Do we have it shared? I have it on my screen, but I can't.
yes.
Oh yeah, you got it. Great. All right. Well, people can see it there, but I'll just read it. Okay. Well, in section 5, or bullet point 5, we'll start there because this is the starting point. We agree there is a point at which in-applications may be excessive. For instance, growers in the highest 80th or 90th percentile, A-R, may be subject to initial limits. This group of growers consistently apply more than 80 to 90% of the agricultural industry to which they are part of in their region. These growers may need technical assistance to implement best management practices to reduce application rates closer to the norm of the industry. And then we follow that up by saying, in addition, targets may be set to reduce nitrate discharge to levels closer to the operational benchmark that protects groundwater quality. Now, the operational benchmark is that is the levels of amounts of nitrogen that can be leached that do not cause exceedance in the drinking water standard, which is 10 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. The targets need to be set based on levels that are achievable by the industry and will lead to improved water quality. Focused research can also be used to help determine the agronomic feasibility of proposed targets. And so what we're suggesting is an iterative 3 to 5 year process that can determine if the industry can make a concerted effort to utilize BMPs and meet the targets. After 3 to 5 years, this process can be evaluated to determine why or why not growers were able to meet the target. The evaluation process should consider environmental and agronomic considerations of achieving the target. The target discharge levels can then, after that process, they can then be further reduced in a reasonable fashion over time as the industry innovates to become more efficient in managing nitrogen. The ultimate goal for the agricultural industry is to achieve nitrate loading that is closest agronomically feasible to the operational benchmark. Through this iterated iterative evaluation process, the regional board will determine whether the industry can ultimately achieve the operational benchmark level. This approach, quite honestly, is based on a system of targets and limits that was laid out in Ag Order 4.0 by the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. However, the difference is the inclusion of an evaluation process to determine if the proposed targets are achievable by the agricultural industry. And so I just wanted to point that out to everybody, because in my mind, that might be the most impactful in my, that I consider the most impactful part of this new draft. Hannah, I don't know if you wanna follow. Or I don't know if there's questions, or if Hannah, if you wanna follow up.
Yeah, I have one thought on this, but I was just going to wait and see if folks had folks who haven't had a chance to work on this as much as you and I, Richard, if they wanted to chime in. But I do have one comment.
I don't see the hand raising tool. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Apologies. I'm sitting in an airport terminal while we're doing this. I agree with all of this. What I would like to challenge you, Richard, and everybody else who has actually some economic experience as opposed to myself, is the question about the 80% or the 90% and why we couldn't say it should be 75%. And maybe in 5 or 10 years, the limit could be a 50% limit. And then at some point, maybe a 25% limit relative to the numbers that we currently have from the INMP in the Central Valley and the Central Coast. And my proposal would be specifically actually not on the A minus R, but actually on the A over R, because that to me seems to be more of a performance evaluation than the A minus R. And it would be a more equitable and fair way to say, okay, among your peers with broccoli growers, the A over R, everybody that's over the 75th percentile should be really better than that. And my challenge to you with the everyone here with the agronomic experience would be to think about, is 75% the right number, 80% or 90% in terms of where in the near future, not in 10 years or 20 years, where in the near future, it would be reasonable to set a limit and say, you know what, if the A over R for somebody within a crop group is more than that X percentile, 75, 80, 90, that's really not reasonable. And we know enough about these systems. People ought to be able to get below, in that lower 75th, be in that lower group of 3/4 of growers that can get below that A over R. So, and then, we could do this with A over R, we could do it with A minus R, we could do it with just A, but I think A over R would be the best ratio. So maybe my challenge to you would be, is it A over R, is it something else? And if it's A over R, should it be the 75th, the 80th, the 90th? Should it be already the 50th? Can we say, you know what, we can all go to be in the better half as a limit that's, enforceable? Is there a number out there that you would feel comfortable with saying? And that's, if the people are not in that group, they really ought to be moving in that direction relatively quickly.
Thank you, Thomas. Michael, before you, I just wanted to, one quick thing. I think perhaps in the Central Valley and I could be wrong, but for applications, it's already just the A. it is already 75th percentile that they go out and so that might provide more justification for 75%. But Michael, go ahead.
So I think the problem with the A divided by R and looking at impact is that it's A over R makes sense if you're comparing the same commodity, you know, how all the tomato growers are doing. It makes a lot of sense. But across commodities, such as say you have wine grapes, compare wine grapes with lettuce growers. It's very hard to do that because you're growing very different commodities. And you could even have a situation where you have a grape grower who has a over R of, I don't know, 1.5, but his A minus R is 30 pounds, you know, so they're already at the benchmark pretty much. And then you have a vegetable grower that maybe has a 1.5 A over R, but still their A minus R is maybe 200 pounds of N. So you're telling me that the vineyard grower is having more impact on the groundwater than the vegetable grower, even though their ratio is higher. You see, it's really hard to do it among commodities.
I would totally agree with you that this would have to be within a commodity, not among commodities. That would make it a lot. It sounds like that would make it a lot easier for making that determination.
That was actually my question, Richard and Hannah. When you wrote this, did you think about the 80 to 90 percentile per commodity or across all commodity? What was your intention when you wrote this?
Richard, did you want to? Oh yeah, I was thinking within a commodity. I think that's the only way it kind of makes. But Richard, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the choice of 80 or 90 or 75, these are numbers that are I guess in all honesty are arbitrary. And and I would feel comfortable that a regional board evaluation of these kinds of numbers would be the most fruitful and on target. And although one thing I had in mind, Daniel, was the graph that you showed. I think it was of silage growers, where very clearly at the 80% mark, the numbers started shooting up. I forget if those were I think they were A minus R numbers. I'm forgetting now. But
yes, A minus R.
Yeah, and so so that in a situation like that is partially true. I think in Region 3, if you look at the numbers that Preservation Inc. presented, there's that 80 to 90% number might make sense, but I think for us, there are pitfalls for us throwing out numbers and making hard decisions about these numbers. I think that's why we said 80 to 90. We're just trying to be reasonable in terms of like it seems like those people that are outside of that percentile ought to be able to do better. In Region 3, it's not probably going to be commodity oriented. It's going to be on a land basis. So I think the A-R metric is really the best metric for that region. These are just some of the thoughts that I had in thinking through this response.
Perhaps the application part, if we're looking at an application limit or target, it would definitely have to be commodity specific. Richard, just in response to what you just said.
Okay.
Daniel, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also prefer it to be commodity specific. I mean, there could be a situation in an extreme case where 80% in the region are vine grapes. So the other 20% that are vegetables are by definition already above the threshold. So I would prefer to have it commodity or system specific. Probably on the Central Coast, it would be more vegetable system or mixed vegetables. And I agree with Richard. It's really hard to come up with a number that's realistic. So whether it's 75, 80, or 90, yeah, I don't have a clear preference here either. And I don't think there's a correct number.
I also don't have to play moderator, but Ali, go ahead.
Oh, please.
Well, I think to answer, I think Thomas' question, that's a critical question to me. I think we should, for the start, I think if we go somewhere between 80 to 90, 85, I don't think economically bother many of our regions for a start point. But I think from there, we should be very careful. I think from there, the regional control board, they need to evaluate over time and learn, economically, or the response from growers, from the coalition. And based on the learning, they can just reduce that number. I think let's talk about the start point. I think if you start with a limit or target of 85%, anywhere between 80, 90, to my understanding, I think it should not bother the economic of our growers that much, specifically if you go with target. But if we develop a dynamic methodology, which regional board can decide based on the data over time they developed, based on the response of the coalition, if they want to go further than that, or accelerate or stop somewhere or whatever they decide. I think if we develop some methodology like that without a specific number or when we should arrive at a specific number, I think it should be more robust for the panel. Just a start point perhaps, and then just recommendation how it should be implemented over time.
Well, I think maybe that is addressed in point 6. Richard, would you agree? This kind of iterative approach. And I also still feel a little confused because I was, I'm not an economist, and I think Thomas brought this up at one of the first meetings. How do we incorporate that? And I'm not sure we've gotten clear feedback. But I think that iterative approach you're talking about, Ali, is kind of what we outlined in point 6. Thomas?
Yeah, this is great. Good discussion. I really appreciate it. One point I wanted to clarify is what I would be after, what I'm sort of make sure, what I wanted to make sure this challenge is about is that this would be a limit as opposed to a target. So the question that I have for myself is, responding to some of the comments that we've heard about you know, is there anything out there where we can say, you know, this is really ought to be a limit, an enforceable limit, and it can be done now or within a short period of time, 2 years or 3 years. This is really something where we think, you as the agronomists think, yes, people ought to be able to do this without too much economic concern. This is entirely feasible, and it's absolutely reasonable to expect for a grower to achieve that relative to their peer group. So I wanted to emphasize that I'm in this discussion about the 75, 80, 90th percentile and whether it should be A over R, A minus R, or A. I'm looking for, is there a limit that as a panel we can set or prescribe how to set versus all of the iterative processing on the targets that are sort of outlined in point 6. And where, whether that's the Central Coast approach or whether that's the Central Valley approach, which has its own iterative process to get to a target. But my question is specifically with respect to 5, is there a limit that we're comfortable setting? An enforceable limit as opposed to a target?
Mike, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I think that's what point 5 says, is it's an enforceable limit. And they're suggesting 80 or 90 percentile. And this would be by sort of commodity group. So this is really at the high end of what grower practices are, the existing practices. So I'm sort of comfortable with somewhere at the 80 or 90 percentile. But going down from that point, that's where I think point 6 comes into play, where you've got to figure out, is it agronomically feasible? And that sometimes takes research, it takes grower data. We got to work together, with the regional board to get to those lower levels. But the 80 and 90 percentile is based on current data. If there's sufficient data to make that decision, then this is really at the high end.
Richard? Well, you're muted.
Mute, Richard.
Sorry. I'm listening hard here, trying to hear suggested modifications to what we've written. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not certain where I'm hearing any strong objections to sections 5 and 6. Mike just kind of outlined the reasoning that we got a lot of feedback about, it seems reasonable to establish these limits at that upper end, whether it's 80, 90, 75, whatever. Maybe we shouldn't, I don't know if we should put numbers, that's a question. I feel a little uneasy about putting numbers because I think it really should be up to the regions to establish those kinds of numbers. And then, like in the case that I'm most familiar with here in Region 3, if you establish that limit up there at the, let's call it the 80th percentile, you're still a ways away from the benchmark value. And so then this iterative process, and quite honestly, it was laid out in Region 3's Ag Order 4.0. The thing I felt uncomfortable about that process is it had, dates, firm dates. Okay, by this year, we're going to go to 300 A minus R. And then after a few more years, we're going to go to 200 and then to 150. I think what we suggested there is that those step downs be an iterative process with an evaluation. But we do need the growers to make a concerted effort. Like if a target is set for, let's call it 300, for the growers to really employ the BMPs and really see if they can hit that mark. And then it'd be evaluated. And if they can, it's up to the regional board, but they could establish, okay, now we are going to try and step it down to 200. Again, with this iterative process, a target, and see how the industry can do. And we're also hoping that in the future, there'll be new innovations, new understanding of nitrogen management, new varieties, whatever the technology is that could help the industry make these movements down closer to that operational benchmark. Now, will they ever get to the operational benchmark? I do not know. You would hope so over time with new technology and implementation of the BMPs. But this gives us a way of moving in that direction, reasonable, over time that allows the industry to make these adjustments. So, I mean, if somebody has a specific thing in 5 and 6 that you think really needs to be fixed, let me know, because this is our moment to do that.
Daniel?
I like 5 and 6. The only thing I would make it clear that it's crop specific.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, even if the percentile remains, let's say it starts at 80, if it remained at 80, 5 years later, the A minus R at 80 will hopefully be much lower because the growers make progress. So the A minus R at the 80th percentile will decrease. And depending on how much progress the growers make, the water board may decide, we have to reduce, we have to go to the 70th or 60th percentile, or yes, we make enough progress and we can stay at the 80th, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, that issue of, those first, and that's why I called it interim initial limits. I think once you've established that limit, I don't know what people think, but this is just my thoughts on it. That's an initial thing, and then after that, I'm not sure how useful. The percentiles they still continue to be important, but do we keep moving the goalpost on the growers? That's what I feel uncomfortable about. I think that initial limit, that's it. 80 to 90, and then after that, we're on to the iterative process to move the whole thing down, and then we leave that behind over time. Hopefully, that's my thought. I don't know what you think.
That works too. Yeah, I think both approaches work. And
Ali?
Thank you, Richard. I think, perhaps the way you wrote number 5, I think should be understandable, but I don't know if you want to add or not. So do we need to add something here to show, jumping to limit whatever 80%, 90%, whatever the region decides, it's based on, a target process they already did in the region, not jumping in the limit immediately. I don't know if, perhaps I think it includes that, but just make sure the region works with growers for a period for target first, And if there is excessive, they jump to limit. I think it's good to be somewhere in this document.
Ali, just to, can I clarify? Can I ask a clarifying question? Do you mean that regions that haven't had a program in place like Region 3 and Region 5 to at first have that 80th or 90th percentile
Yes,
be a
because
target?
this is a recommendation for California, different region, right? And even though it's not specifically about Region 5 and
right,
it should cover every region. I mean, just it's good to somewhere, not here, but in this document we develop just to recommend a region wants to go with limit, at least they need to try target for a period. That's all. Maybe it's not doesn't need, but
So Ollie, like a just like a 2-year. I'm not certain exactly how to implement what you're suggesting. So like you're saying, start with a target, and then this target can transition to being a limit after a period of time.
this is what I mean.
Okay.
As a recommendation, general recommendation. Of course, the regional board, they are doing that, but if you think is necessary to mention it, I think is good because it is a document for the future.
Yeah.
Godu?
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah and Richard. This is great. I do have a few comments. One is on just bringing back the conversation to application limits. And I wonder if we can consider that in these responses we have, and maybe number 5, combining this with application limits, having some language there as a recommendation to the regional water boards to have some application limits. Because I worry that from a drinking water community point of view, this elongates the process, right? Particularly the iterative part, when you say 3 to 5 years, that is more communities going with unsafe drinking water while the industry tries to adjust. And I do think we need that process of how do we get to actually retain a benchmark. But I think combining it with some limitations on application, I think we should cover that end of how much are people applying, and out of this panel, some recommendations on reduction in that application, if we're actually going to get to this point of 10 milligram per liter. And then another comment I had was on number 5. I think this is line 28 into 29. So it says, for instance, growers in the highest 80th or 90th percentile of A-R may be subject to initial limits. And I think this part of discussion here, we might need to clearly define what we mean by those initial limits. I think it might be helpful to talk about, to have, we've talked about this step-down approach, which Richard was describing, which I think is great. If we can provide some recommendations of what we think that step-down approach should look for different regions. For instance, Region 3, this is the step-down approach. This is what it can look like if you have these different practices. And ultimately, that ends at a benchmark of the drinking water standard, right? Public health. So I think it leaves it vague, in my opinion, if we leave it up to the, each region to identify what that looks like for them. But if we're able to come up with potentially what are the step down numbers as an industry you're working towards through these years in combination with some BMPs. And I just also wanted to agree on the commodity based. I think that might be helpful just to answer this question.
Godu, can I just ask a clarifying question? Because I think, so when you say application limit, you mean just A, right?
Yes. Okay. Because we have application limits and we have discharge limits.
Yes.
Which is really, but then looking at the application, how much are people applying? Because I think that is a huge part of the equation here.
Okay, thank you. I'm just taking notes. That's why I'm asking all these clarifying questions. Ruth?
I think this is a great approach. And I think just listening to all the comments, I really like the idea of initial limits and then the iterative process. And I wonder if that could be more spelled out and to show clearly what the transition is, that there's an initial limit on the 80th or 90th percentile, and then that feeds into the process described in number 6. Like maybe is there a timeline for number 5 over which it should then become part of number 6? And maybe just spelling that out more of how that might work, because I think it's a good plan. And I realize the iterative 3 to 5 year process sounds like a longer timeline to achieve reduction in groundwater quality impacts. I also think it has more potential to engage agriculture in a constructive conversation to really work on best management practices that become more standardized and more accepted over time. And so I think there's a benefit to that beyond enforcement of actually making that more of a standard practice.
Michael?
I just sort of want to address what Ali and Godo were talking about. I think I think what he's saying is also is if you have a region where there's no A-R data or not enough, you need time to get that data before you set these limits. And so, but I think if you have, 4 or 5 years of A-R data, that you think it's enough data, then it makes sense, to start putting that limit on at the 80 or 90 percentile. And then there's areas or commodities we don't have our data. And so if the alternative is to report A, this is sort of what Godo is saying, then there just would be a nitrogen application limit. So I would agree with Godo in the sense, if you don't have our data, then you have to put a limit on the A data.
Thank you.
So those are things that need to maybe be pointed out in 5.
Okay. The State Water Resource Board.
Yeah, sorry. You guys can all continue the conversation, just a gentle time reminder.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, great discussion. I wanted to, I think I hear a lot of agreement here. And I just wanted to point out currently in the Central Valley, I don't know how it's done in the Central Coast, there is a process with the outliers where the coalitions focus on the outliers, which is probably, I don't know what it translates to in terms of statistics, probably, 95th percentile or something, and making sure that they work. And it may or may not be, and it may be beyond our expertise to decide whether that's the right process or having a hard limit is the right process. But I think that is already there. And we may or may not be very specific about this. And what I also wanted to say is in terms of, the future for the limits as opposed to the targets, where the limits are we don't want the worst case, right? We want people to be on the good side, but we can't sort of say that really big target that we're all getting for that, we want that to be a hard limit. But there is sort of a place where we can say, yeah, this is shouldn't be allowed anymore. I think we could prescribe in 5 in a few words, Hannah, maybe just to outline either very generically or specifically or generically with an example that this could be an iterative process where, over every 5-year period or every 10-year period, these numbers are adjusted. And to the degree that over time, what an 80th percentile or 90th percentile will change, one could take an approach and say, we're going to take the initial data from the 2020s, early 2020s, and relative to those data reported then, it's going to be the 80th percentile now, and it's going to be the 60th percentile then, and it's going to be the 50th percentile another 10 years down the road or something like that. That would be one way to do it. And maybe that's how we express that and leave it up to the regions on how they want to do that. Again, we can be general or we can be specific. And the specific example would be to do some kind of fixed reduction every 10 years relative to an existing data set, not relative to the moving target. But it is a moving target. As somebody asked the question whether we're moving the targets on the growers. We are moving the targets on the growers, as the Central Coast has done and as the Central Valley has specified in their adaptive management plan for the targets. And I think that's clearly spelled out, and that's not the wrong way to go about it. It just needs to be, I think what growers are looking for is a certainty up front so they know what the process is. And as long as the process is transparent and set out up front and then implemented in a coherent way, I would anticipate that to be okay. And it would be good to hear comments back from the public on this. Richard, on 6, I wanted to say, I would probably provide edits to 6 to make sure that it's inclusive of what Region 5 is doing. I would hate for what we're writing to be interpreted in a way where one region or the other that actually has a program would be forced to change what they're already doing. That's a good program. So I would offer that I will edit 6 to be inclusive of what Region 5 is doing. Because as it's written, it's very specific to the Central Coast.
Yes. Actually, all of you have given fantastic feedback. And if I could, Hannah, I know you're taking notes. I've got half a page of notes already, but I want to make sure that we capture the essence of what you guys have been just laying out. If you could please just take 3 minutes and write down your thoughts. Of course, you have to send them to Sam and Erica, and then they'll get them to us. But I just want to make sure I captured this feedback as well as possible, and make sure I didn't misunderstand something. So that's just a request. Ollie and Goto and Ruth and Thomas and Daniel and Mike, please, that would be very helpful.
I think that's a good suggestion, and there may be some comments on other parts too. So would it be possible for everybody to read the document and send comments by Wednesday so that Sam can compile everything and send it out? Our next meeting is already next Friday. And I think the draft is really in a good place. So please, when you send comments, focus on the content and on minor issues, and not. I think at this point we don't want to ask Richard and Hannah to rewrite entire sections of the document. But if everybody could have a look at the document and submit their comments and concerns by Wednesday, so then we could have a look at the document again next Friday. Would that work?
Yes, that works for us. Thank you.
Mike, you have your
I just
answer.
wanted clarification from Thomas about how 0.6 conflicts with Region 5. Maybe he has more insight than me. I guess they don't have targets right now. Is that the main issue?
I don't have the document in front of me. What Region 5 doesn't currently have a schedule in the way Region 3 has a schedule for the applied nitrogen or the A-R. They have a schedule, right? You go from 500 to 300, et cetera, and there's dates set out for it, and it's targets and then it's limits. What Region 5 has is they have a 5-year adaptive process where every 5 years the target is the targets that are set. So we have targets, that were set in 2022. And then there's going to be a revision to those targets in 2027 and in 2032. So every 5 years, the target setting is being revised to include additional information.
Are they, when you say targets, are you talking about application targets?
No. So in Region 5, the target is essentially a speed limit where the odometer is the values that are reported by the coalitions using CV-SWAT. So you have the irrigation nutrient management plan report, the summary report at the end of the year that is being submitted by the grower to the coalition. That information is then used for a CV, basically to pick out from a library of millions of CV-SWAT runs, the one run that most closely matches that INMP report. The same soil, the same crop, the same climate, so the specific location. It's the very location where that field is for which the INMP summary report has been provided. There's a lot of different simulations done for that location for different crops and for different management practices. And the one that most closely matches the application and the harvest data in the INMP report, that CV-SWAT simulation is used, and it provides the full nitrogen budget, and it provides an end leaching number, how much nitrogen is leached to groundwater. That is the value that's being reported for that field. And the target is a average leaching across the township that needs to be achieved by a deadline. And that target is essentially selected so that most of the water quality actually meets the drinking water limit in that township. And in 2020, Region 5 decided to use the CV-SWAT approach to come up with these values. And that was a decision among the coalitions. In 2021, the coalitions had to provide their first set of values using the method that they proposed in 2020, which they did in 2021. And then they were, in the next step, they were required by 2022 to say, okay, tell us what your target is for where you want to be with these values. And the approach chosen was to say, we're going to look at townships, 6 by 6 mile areas. We're going to look at all of the different discharges, and we're going to look at how much we have to reduce these discharges, these values, to get to safe drinking water limit in groundwater. And so we have a map for each township in the Central Valley that identifies the loading target for that township. And it also shows which townships already meet the loading target and which townships have to improve on the loading target. And that process will be revisited every 5 years. And to the degree we have new data and better models, that will be improved upon.
Daniel, I would appreciate your edits referring to what you just said, because that's a whole different process than I'm used to. And Hannah and I would appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay.
You mean
Yeah, I can do
Thomas?
that.
Yeah, I think you meant.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Thomas, about that?
Yeah.
With the township, is that like correlated to a I know you're working on NPSAT, but is that correlated to like a groundwater basin or a group of wells, or like how are those townships delineated?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correlated directly to the wells in that township. So we have a model for the Central Valley that is based on, the user could choose whether they use a CVHM based model or a C2VSIM based version of NPSAT. And then in that model are the wells that we have well records for from DWR.
Okay.
with their specific screen locations to the degree we know that, with their specific depth, et cetera, et cetera. And we take the groundwater model takes the loading from CV SWAT, which basically says at 6 feet depth, you have this much leaching of nitrate. CVNPSAT takes that at 6 feet depths, determines how long it takes to get to the water table, and then routes it through the groundwater system and looks at what happens at wells over time. And the way that the target process is done based on the direction from the State Water Board is the target ultimately has to be to provide clean drinking water. And the practices should be in place by, I forget, the late 2040s, so that those practices are demonstrably going to meet drinking water quality in wells, even if it takes 100 years or 200 years. But they should, to the best of our knowledge, be such that ultimately there will be drinking water quality across these wells. And so the model carries out these simulations over a long period of time and looks at sort of the end result and how much reduction needs to be made sort of in the crop soil system, so that ultimately, even if it's after a long time, drinking water quality is achieved in these wells, most of these wells. And we don't, the targets aren't selected to have all wells in the model meet drinking water quality because of the uncertainty in CV SWAT and in the groundwater modeling setup and in knowledge about denitrification. So the way it was done for the 2022 targets is the loading was lowered so that at least 80% of wells were meeting the drinking water limit.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, shall we put our comments in writing and then send it to Sam and forward it to Richard and Hannah, so that you have more to work with? Would that work for you, Richard and Hannah? Are there other things you really want to discuss today in a group on question 1 or 2?
Well, Hannah, I'm sorry, I kind of stole the show. I don't know if you
No,
had
I
something
thought-
else on your mind.
No, I thought that was the most critical part.
Okay. Oh, good. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Hannah and Richard. It's really a great draft, and I really like the outline of your draft. So I was wondering whether, as a group, we can agree for all the other questions we follow your template of answering the question, so that we kind of have that at the end we have a document that has a similar style across all questions. So does somebody oppose or think there would be is a better way to organize the response to a question, or can we use Richard's and Hannah's response as a template, just the style? Thomas?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of concerns about the way this is coming together in terms of what, how this looks like. I'm proposing a completely different structure for this report. I sent staff an outline for what I think this report should look like. And maybe staff can put that up on the screen. I just sent that in an email before my airplane landed. What I would propose is that we take an approach similar to what the first report looks like, that we actually have a very structured approach to how we present the information that we are asked for to provide to answer these questions. And by way of providing this information, answer these questions, will provide a key on like where the answers to the questions are. I think that can be done. Or a short version of the answer in an executive summary to each of these questions, but that we actually have a report that goes about answering these questions in a very different structure. I don't know whether this is the right time to look at that. I think my proposal would be to focus today less on the details of how the questions are entered or the format, and that we look at that outline and structure and discuss whether we want to go with that at some point, maybe not today, but that we do focus today on the answers, like this is how we think about it, this is how it should be done, and then it would be I think much easier to reformat what we're doing and put that in a format in the alternative outline structure.
Yes, I think ideally we would need to have a look at your proposal. So if staff could send it to everybody, and then that could be something we can discuss next time. What about team? Do you have to show it on the screen before you can send it to all of us, or can you just send it to us and we can go back to it next time?
Yeah, if you'd like for us to share it on the screen now, we can do that, or we can share it on the screen next time and then post it publicly for everyone to see. Which would you prefer?
What I would like is that you send it to all of us before next meeting, that we have a chance to look at it. Yeah, if you can do that without showing it right now, then that would be ideal. Then we can actually focus on the topic, on the content today, and not on the outline.
Sounds good. So we'll commit on the 12th to have that sent out and shared with everyone.
Does that work for you, Thomas?
Yeah, that works for me. This is great.
Okay, great. So shall we move on to question 3, or any last thought about question 1 and 2? Okay, then Ruth and Gudu, you have received a lot of suggestions for question 3. Are there things you think we should discuss as a group that would help you incorporate the suggestions, or do you have enough information to work on the next draft of question 3? So if you like to take over the discussion, please go ahead.
I can start and then pass on to Ruth. The comments were very helpful, so thank you to the panel. They were mostly edits on like structure of the phrasing of the sentences, so that was very, very helpful. I know that in our last discussion, we had discussed sort of moving away from giving CV SWOT as an exact example in the document, and more so using hydrogeological models. And I think that's fine by Ruth and I. So we can make that amendment as well. There was just I had one question for the panel. And I can share this very general, my screen. Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
So the question that was posed to us was around these factors from panel 1, the first panel. And really, at least my interpretation of the question is really around answering if we have more advances when it comes to nitrogen mass balance. And our answer really was that there are some of these models that can account for these different factors. There was a second part of that question in the first panel that was specifically asking about nitrogen in and nitrogen removed by crops. I put in a comment here that, as a panel, we're sort of moving away from A over R and really focusing on having A minus R based on question 1 and 2's response from Richard and Hannah. So I guess just opening this particular item up for conversation regarding the ratio and how much we want to go into the ratio here, which is sort of like a different element of this question that was posed by the first panel. I know, Hannah, you had a comment here regarding this question.
Yeah, I think, as a reporting mechanism back to farmers, I think it can be kept in there. I think region if I'm not mistaken, Region 5 does use it in reporting back to growers. And I think it can help them, you know, in terms of their thinking about their agronomic performance. But I think for like actually regulating discharge, it doesn't make sense because it's not the actual amount lost or potential to be lost.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we can leave this particular language, Ruth. That this is the language around A over R in question 3. Thomas?
Yeah, I was wondering, because the question is not that different from question 7 about the various discount factors. And I was wondering whether we should just mash these up, these two questions, questions 3 and 7, which is part of the reason why I thought about maybe doing a different outline. In that outline that you'll receive, my proposal is that we actually discuss in the report, sort of briefly go through the nitrogen cycle and discuss all these different factors in the nitrogen cycle of a soil crop system. And so the nitrogen transformations, the volatilizations, the removal, the carryovers, and then in question 7, you got the discount factors for compost, for organic fertilizer, and scavenge. So just explaining these different components in one section, in a separate section, talking about which of these components can we measure, how do we measure them, at what scales do we measure them, how often do we measure them, and then and I think then this all is going to fall out much easier, because one of the other pieces that's not clear right now throughout these questions is what actually is A and what is R. There are different regions, and as we talk about A and R, there's different definitions. Some people talk about A as the fertilizer applied. Some people talk about A as everything that's going into a field, including atmospheric deposition. And so I think by having a section that actually explains all of these terms, puts it all together, and then sorts out what is reasonable in terms of accounting in a agricultural management system, makes it a lot easier to go through all of this. But I think in general, what you have actually as an answer there, I don't have any issues with. I think that's really nice.
The order board?
We were just wondering, the outline came up again. Would you guys like us to share the outline on a shared screen so you all can see the proposed outline?
Well, I think give us a chance first to have a look at it before we discuss it.
Okay, just double checking. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think we should have a look at it first, and then we can have a discussion among ourselves. But yeah, independent of the outline, I think what you have written here is, and if you're going to revise question 3, it will be valuable content. It may not in the future, it may not be presented as response to question 3, but I think most of the elements will be somewhere. So I think we should, for the moment, we can still continue with discussing the response to different questions, and then at the end we can decide how we want to present it. But I think it's still, at the moment, it makes sense to go by question, because that's what we have. Ruth?
I wonder, because I haven't seen the outline yet, but I wonder if we do a different outline, if we could just reference where in our document each question is answered, just so it can be cross-referenced. That might be helpful.
Oh, we would have to do that for sure. Yes, 100%.
Hey, Ruth, oh yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
I was going to say, in the interest of time, I think we have a lot of work to do in incorporating these comments. And so I'm fine moving on with the comments we have, but if there's other things that people want to add, please feel free.
Okay, Mike.
Well, just in general suggestion, there seems like, this is asking about specific factors that are sort of where we have new information, and sort of answering it as narrowly as possible. Keep it, most readable, I think. And also, sometimes we have overlap between the questions, and there's nothing wrong with saying, well, that was answered in the other question, and just refer to that section of the other question where that, where the answer is. Otherwise, we're sort of repeating ourselves as we go from question to question.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely need to do that, and probably at the end even more when we have the answer to all the questions. So Ruth and Gudu, what do you think is a realistic timeline? Our next meeting is already next Friday. Is it possible for you to work on a draft before Wednesday, or shall we expect the next version of the draft before our meeting in January? How do you feel about it?
To be perfectly honest, I would prefer January if that is okay.
Okay, yeah. I think we still have
a lot going on the
to
next couple
discuss
weeks.
next time. Yeah.
One quick clarification that may be useful for you all to know. If it's a clean revised draft, it can be shared sooner than the ones with attributes. The one with attributes are the ones that we have to make sure are associated and quickly presented in a public meeting. So if you have a clean revised file and it's ready anytime, between now and then, you can give it to us and we can distribute it and post it on the FTP site, and it'll be available for everybody to have.
Oh, that's great to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ngudu and Ruth, for putting that together. Shall we move on to question 4? No opposition? I think that's yes. Similar situation here. Mike and I wrote a first draft. We got a lot of comments. Mike, are there things we should discuss today or as a group before we revise the document based on the response to question 4 based on the comments we received? You're still mute.
Yeah, I haven't had time to review all the comments, but I noticed Thomas has probably the most, so maybe he should tell us his take on this.
I think some of it will also be overlap with question 1. I had the impression some of the comments by Thomas we may be able to shorten considerably because they are already covered in question 1.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas, any comments from your side?
I don't remember all I said. Yeah, I mostly wanted to sort of expand on the definitions of A and R a little bit, and the use of A minus R versus A over R, and be sure that all of that is in there, but also and make sure that it's inclusive of the CV SWAT approach in the Central Valley, and that those all stand side by side, and cover that. That was my main goal.
Great. We try to incorporate everything, and then you will see the next draft, and you can let us know whether we did a good job or not. Other comments?
There is a separate question on the small farms. I think it's question 8. The section here on the small farms, that's something that probably could be moved in with the same discussion in question 8, somehow combined into that. My proposal for that alternative outline is that we actually have a separate section that just discusses small farms. And that could just be a combination of the section here and what's in answer to question 8.
Yeah, I would say we keep it in, and then we'll see when we have a draft for question 8 whether or where it fits best, or in an alternative outline where it would be.
Yeah.
What about team?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you saw, we distributed a draft of question 8 is actually available.
Yes, we go from one to the next, so we will get to question 8 at one point.
Okay, sorry.
Mike, what do you think is a realistic timeline for us? Can we work on a draft before next meeting, or shall we shoot for the January meeting?
I think, you and I need to look this over carefully, and then we may have more questions for the next meeting for clarification and discussion, and then January, we should have the next draft. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good.
One concern I have is sort of the flip side of what Thomas is saying, that if you start including a bunch of things, so you are sort of complying with the modeling, you're getting something very complicated for the growers to report if we're not using the model. So so there's you have to think of both sides. What's the impact of including too many things in here that maybe are not knowable from the grower's perspective, that you would need a modeling if you're in a situation where you have a region that's not using a model, a simulation model.
Yeah. No, I think this is, you're right on point on this. In the Central Valley, the growers aren't doing the modeling. The growers are reporting basic numbers on their applied nitrogen and their removed nitrogen, their harvest. The modeling is done by the coalitions, and it's actually done. There's one modeling team for all of the coalitions, so it's done for the whole Central Valley. So essentially there is a 2-layer process in the Central Valley. One is what the growers are reporting, and then the second process is what the coalitions are doing with those data. And that can be all very clearly explained, I think, in a report that explains these various ways to measure and go about pieces, and explain, what's reasonable for a grower to do, what's reasonable for a coalition or for the regional water board to do with the data, which are 2 different things.
Yeah, because I interpret this question as something about what growers would do, not coalitions doing simulation models. And so that's how, when we were answering it from the perspective of, okay, this is the type of data a grower would have available, and this would, I guess, tell them how well they're doing also, to some extent. So it helps them with their management. If we add all these things in here, this is something I think we have to break out and say, well, this is for not the growers, but some other group that's trying to assess the impacts of the A-R metric on the groundwater.
Yeah. No, this is a good point, and I think that's something we'll need to. I can look into how I would edit that to make that clear.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Shall we move on to question 5? Okay, so Ali and Thomas, you submitted a draft for answer to question 5. You also got a lot of comments. Are there things we should discuss today as a team before you start revising and incorporating the
Yeah,
comments?
there was a question on or a comment on the germination water. I don't know whether it was from Richard or from Michael. With respect to accounting for nitrogen and irrigation water. And maybe this might come from exactly what you just kind of pointed to, Michael. You're thinking a lot about what is the grower actually doing and how is the grower making decisions with this and what is grower reporting versus how do we think about the nitrogen cycle and what's leaching to groundwater. Let's see. I'm out of my, I can't look at my laptop because it's almost out of battery.
Maybe we should find the area. I have
Yeah,
to
let me see
remember
whether
where that comment was made.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, was that you, Ali? Okay.
Yes, that was me, yeah. I saw your question. We can clarify. Well, the question is here, in the form, they put an amount for irrigation amount, but it's not clear is the total irrigation from the start point of germination or no, just within the season. I think the point is, if we want to account for nitrogen in irrigation water, if you look at just vegetables, for lettuce, so sometimes 40% of the total amount of water in season goes to just germination time, which is not that effective as accounting for nitrogen applied for crop. Basically, crop cannot use that. If you have sandy soil, even you washed it during the germination. I think that's the point. So I think we should separate that because we cannot account as nitrogen applied for crop, that part of germination, irrigation, irrigation germination time. So I think we can add something in the form to make sure that water is not, germination water is not included. That's the water after germination, because we can account that for nitrogen.
I totally get that from a grower's perspective.
Yeah.
From a groundwater perspective,
I know
the nitrate that goes on the field is nitrate that goes on the field. And if it's not going to be used by the crop, it leaches down to groundwater. It needs to be accounted for.
I know. So that's confusion. So we should take care of that.
Yeah.
As an answer to another question, I think somewhere we wrote, or Mike added that comment that as a maximum, the water applied to meet ET, or the nitrate in that water, should be counted within A-R for growers to report. Again, that's not for modeling, but growers should only report the nitrate as a maximum, the nitrate in the water that's needed to meet ET. So that would eliminate a lot of the germination water.
Exactly.
But what's the rationale behind that, Daniel? I don't understand it. Isn't the reporting intended to understand how much nitrate is leaching to groundwater? So we need to really understand the complete mass balance on the unit that we're looking at, the orchard or the field or the vineyard. And that includes all the water that's applied and all the nitrate in that water that's applied. Which is not to say that that's, I'm not saying that is water that the grower could avoid putting on the field. I think that's a separate process. We account for everything that goes in, and then we say, if you have nitrate in irrigation water and 40% of your irrigation water goes into germination, intrinsically, the grower will lose the rest of that nitrate. And there is very little the grower can do about it. And currently, we do not have management practices to address this problem. That would get the grower out of it's all ultimately it's about which pieces of this nitrogen cycling from which we're losing nitrate can we actually address with best practices, and which pieces can we not address, and spelling some of this out, I think, in the report. But the accounting should be for everything.
Mike, I think you have a good answer to that question. You
Well,
provided it before.
I think the problem is they are using the A minus R for regulatory purposes, to direct growers on targets. Because there's that direction, sort of what we've been talking about. Or are you using it for modeling, for telling you what's going on in the groundwater? And that's the dichotomy here. I think a lot of us are thinking, okay, we want an equation that the growers can actually manage, and it feeds back to their practices. If we said, okay, report, and this in Ag Order 4.0 originally had all the water, and you can do that, but the growers told us right away, this is what's going to happen. I will never use my high nitrate wells. I'm going to drill deeper wells, or I'm going to use another well. And that's exactly what we don't want them to do.
Yeah.
That would discourage them from this whole pump and, fertilize concept, utilize that nitrate in the water. So by saying, okay, you're going to be responsible for the water depth equal to ET, or what you apply, whichever is smaller, because in vineyards, they don't apply full ET. That will encourage them to say, okay, this is the amount of nitrogen I should be able to make use of in my management plan. So in this case, we're trying to use the A minus R as sort of more of a management tool that's related to targets. But if you want to do something, use the same data for telling you what's happening in the groundwater, it will come short for sure.
Yeah. I think this is going to be something really important for us to carve out in this report. This dichotomy between reporting to understand what goes to groundwater, or having the numbers that are used to understand what's actually leaching to groundwater, and having numbers that are being used and are useful, and also incentivize the growers to do the right things. And what I hear you say and clearly explain is that's, to the degree that A and R and various pieces of A and various pieces of R provide different amounts of information to somebody who looks at groundwater leaching versus somebody who's making management decisions. I think that's really important to understand on all sides. And that's important to understand for the boards when they set up their respective programs. And it sounds to me like that's also something that the programs ought to identify in the way they structure these. Which pieces are for the growers, and what do they expect growers to? How do they expect growers to react to the setup versus what they learn from it with respect to groundwater?
Daniel, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I want to say, Gudu, you raised your hand. And after that, Richard.
No, I raised my hand to support that conversation around understanding what is leaching, or from the grower perspective. My understanding of at least some of the questions that were posed to us is they had this language around, if it was limits, they would say something like protective of groundwater quality and supporting long-term RLRP. So I think that first part of the conversation that Michael and Thomas were just having around what is actually leaching is what we're called to address, but then bringing on this element of from the grower point of view. But I think I'm just supporting that I think it's very helpful.
Thank you. Richard?
Something that just caught my eye was down at the bottom of, I guess it's at the bottom of 5A, the very bottom. It says, ideally A should include all contributions counted towards feeding a crop, including long-term average contributions from the soil organic matter in pool. Due to verifiable long-term decreased soil organic matter, and then there's another bullet point. R should include all removal, including net contribution to soil organic matter. And I guess kind of a comment that I think Thomas just made about, this report should include, the best information that we have currently, scientifically. Well, of course, that's what we're here for, right? And but those factors, it's just an open question. How well do we understand that kind of those aspects? And across the state of California, so I kind of just liked. I guess that might be something we may have to look into. And then the other approach that I look at, just from our agronomic work, is that we would tend to ignore those things and measure them with the soil nitrate test. Because the soil nitrate test is capturing the nitrate from, fertilizer, but it's also from whatever mineralizes from soil organic matter, so forth. So anyways, just kind of a question. I don't have an answer. I just wanted to throw it out there and see what the group thoughts are about that.
Richard, exactly where in the document are you?
Right above 5B.
Above 5B.
He's got a bunch of bullet points there.
That's question 5.
Question 5, yeah.
So we have done quite a few studies looking at nitrogen mineralization from soil organic matter, and it's highly variable. So I don't think it's anything practical, or at the moment, not something growers could enter easily, or it could be included easily into A-R. So it's something, a SWOT model, just by running it 1,000,000 times and look what is the best outcome, can determine or can get to it. But again, I think that's another thing where we have to distinguish between a model approach and A-R, which needs to be based on values that actually can be reported.
Okay. So you're saying at this point, we may not be able to do what I just read. Is that what you're saying?
Not within A-R. A SWOT model, they can get as close as possible, but not. I don't think it would make a lot of sense to include it in A-R because it's really variable, and it would add a lot of uncertainty to the calculated A-R value.
Yeah, we should probably stipulate that then in that section there. That point you're just making, because that would clarify the question I just asked.
So just to clarify, Richard, you mean that point A should include all contributions counted towards feeding the crop?
Yes.
Okay, Thomas and Ali, do you think?
Yes, one question I have for the group about the audit. I think you mentioned a lot of things here, but do we really need at the field scale any audit, or how we want to do it, or just say no?
Can you clarify that question?
Oh, for the audit, the audit
there is a question on the audit, yes.
Yes, at the field level, I think you did a good job for the regional, audit, but how about field level or field scale audit? Do we recommend anything?
I think Mike added a comment about that, didn't you? So
That's a good one, actually. The
yeah.
invoice.
Can
I
you
think that's
include it in your revision, and then we can discuss it next time? 'Cause I keep getting emails from the water board team that we need to wrap up. So
Sounds good.
I'm sorry. Not emails, but messages. So do you think for the moment you have enough, Thomas and Ali, to work on the next version of the draft for question 5?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what is your preferred timeline? Next Wednesday or ahead of the January meeting? Is that a rhetorical question?
January, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah, no comment.
So then I would say, so we have to wrap up our discussion today, but please send your comments, minor comments, to question 1 and 2 by Wednesday so that Sam can incorporate them and we can discuss that next time. And then next time we can work on 6 through 9. I think that will be plenty of work for next time, and then we can come back to the question 3 through 5 on January 7th. Okay, with that, so water board team, now you can take over.
Thank you. Minute ahead of schedule.
Yeah. Are we, off mute?
We are off.
Okay, yeah, thank you, everybody, for, promptly ending your discussion. I'm so sorry to push you along like that. We were all enjoying the conversation, but, we do have an important topic to cover here. And that is that we have a revised, charter, for the panel charter to help us guide us through this last stage. And I'm going to share my screen. It's going to take me just a minute to figure out. Yeah, there's the button. And I'm going to share this document. And hopefully you can all see my screen now. And I can make it a little bigger, I think. And so this is a draft revision, and once you guys vote on it, we would kind of note at the top that this was approved by the panel on whatever date you end up approving of this. You absolutely, after we go through this and we look at the dates and you guys discuss what kind of time you need, if you identify a need for additional working group meetings in January, we can update this and bring it back next week, and then we can finalize it at that point. So I just wanted to put that out there. The revisions to this document are primarily, there's some like minor changes to the meeting dates. For example, the plenary meeting based off of a poll of your availability and the availability of rooms at Kelly, PA. We identified that March 11th would be when we would plan to have the final plenary meeting. But of course, even if today you didn't decide to extend the time frame, but you discovered in January you needed more time, we're just making sure that it's clear to everybody that the final plenary meeting is subject to change under the direction of the panel chair. So we do want to try to get a good handle on our schedule, but if something comes up, we are very flexible and here to support you in every way that you need for the amount of time that you need to complete this, this very important project. We noted that we have this public listening session on December 17th. That's been noticed. And then the big revisions are that we added that there will be a public workshop. So I'm just going to read this text. As noted above, the panel recommendations will be compiled into I'm trying to read this. All right, there we go. Into a draft report to the State Water Board. This draft report will be released for a 30-day public comment period A public workshop will be held following the release of the draft report and during the public review period. The purpose of the public workshop is to provide an opportunity for the public and interested parties to offer verbal comments on the draft document. Note that written comments to the draft report will be accepted and provided to the panel for consideration, but a formal response to comments will not be developed. So the plan is for us to receive whatever comments we get through the public workshop and via written comments. And then the water board team will compile and summarize and organize those comments for you all to consider. And that'll be part of the process for us to present that information to you sometime after the close of the public comment period, but ahead of your March 11th plenary meeting, where you guys would have the opportunity to, consider any revisions that you think are appropriate based off the feedback that you're hearing. If any of the comments do kind of trigger a revision based on your expert opinion. The other revision is just to document what the drafting process looks like for the panel report. The panel members may draft responses to a subset of panel charge questions in groups of 2. For example, for pairs of panelists will work on 2 to 3 of the 9 questions. Upon completion of a draft, the authors will share the draft with State Water Board staff, who in turn will share it with the other panel members and the public. The other panel members may individually submit comments on the draft to the State Water Board staff, who may compile the comments from panel members into one document. The other panel members may not discuss the draft document amongst themselves or with the authors of the draft outside of a public meeting. In connection with an agendized item at a public meeting of the panel, State Water Board staff may share a document of compiled comments with the authors of the draft and members of the public. This is intended to facilitate a discussion of the draft responses and other panel members' comments at the public meeting. The authors of the draft responses may not jointly discuss other panel member comments prior to the public meeting in which the comments are discussed. And that concludes the revisions that were made to the revised charter. And so at this time, I think it would be appropriate for you to discuss whether or not you would like to consider if you would need additional time or additional working group meetings beyond the January 14th all-day working group meeting that's currently scheduled to be the last working group meeting for you all. And we can also, we'll also, after we hear from the panel members, we'll open this for public comment as well. So yes, Hannah.
To clarify, we have the 3-hour meeting next week, a week from today, and then the next meeting is not until January 14th.
The next meeting after that's on January 7th.
7th. Okay, so there's okay.
They have one more 3-hour meeting, and then a week later you'll have the January 14th meeting, which is currently scheduled from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then that one, I think, it will set you up in a in the same room that we've been in when we've had our large plenary meeting. But we're gonna put tables out so that you can all sit around, in a more of a conference style setting with each other for those that are able to attend in person.
And you set the date for the final meeting, March 11th. Just wanted to mention that I didn't have it. I may be the only one, but I didn't have it in my agenda. So that's the date for the last meeting currently.
That is based off of a poll that was conducted of your availability. And so yes, just in the last couple of days, we identified that March 11th seemed to work for everybody and it was the farthest out date that we had polled you for. Yes, Nguru?
I have the January 11th meeting, but I don't have the January 7th. Would you be able to share that with me? I don't know if everyone else has a meeting for January 7th.
Okay, yeah, I'm so sorry if that has not been sent out, but absolutely we will send out a calendar reminder for everybody for the January 7th meeting from 3 to 6 p.m. And hopefully you're still available. Comments?
Yeah, I guess I'm confused about. I don't see any of these dates in this document. I see March 11th in there. I see December 17th, but I don't see any of the work group meetings in there. And can you repeat when the work group meetings, are they somewhere?
So the working group meetings dates are not identified in the charter, and they have not been identified. But it's at the direction of the panelists, so that's why if you need additional meetings, we can work that out.
So then, so can you go over the working group meeting as opposed to all the other meetings that are listed here? So I have from this 3 meetings, December 17th, January 11, and March 11. Did I get that right?
Almost. Let me clarify. You guys have a working group meeting next Friday, which is December 12th. We have a listening session on December 17th that you are welcome to attend, but it's not mandatory. And everybody loves it when you're there. So it'd be awesome as many of you as possible can come. Then you have a working group meeting scheduled for January 7th. And that meeting is from 3 to 6 p.m. And then you have a working group meeting scheduled for January 14th. That was formerly a plenary meeting. So you guys were all available, and it's technically was booked from 10 till 4 p.m. And so it's been changed to a working group meeting, so you guys could have an all-day meeting to sort of finalize your draft report. And that's on January 14th. And that would be right now currently the last working group meeting that we have on the calendar. And when you guys finish that meeting, if you didn't have any more meetings scheduled and everything went according to plan, it would be, you guys would be saying you're completely finished with this report, and you would shortly thereafter give us a clean file of your compiled report, and then we would distribute that for public comment sometime shortly after. We would notice it and then make it available to the public. And then we'll host a workshop sometime during the 30-day public comment period. And I'm sorry that this isn't in a slide, and yeah, does that help if I verbally go over that with you all?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
And also just a final reminder that all of our meeting dates are being posted on our website for sharing. I'll let you scroll down to the working group meeting. The only date not listed here is that January 14th date, which was previously slotted for the plenary meeting, which is being transitioned now to the final working group meeting, which is an all-day working group meeting.
And Hannah, we did not get an invite for the January 7th meeting yet. It was mentioned a few times, but we are still waiting for an invite.
Okay, some people said they were invited, so I just wanted to make sure that I got on that invite.
We will send out an invite ASAP. I'm so sorry that invite hasn't made it to your inbox, that hasn't circulated. I think we were focused on 2025 for a long time here. And so we must have just not noticed that. So we'll get you guys our invitations. And are you all still available on January 7th? Yeah, okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, so would you, one thing to consider when you're voting on this is it might be, we have to publicly notice every meeting that you have. So if you're not sure that you can finish on January 14th, and there's a small chance that you would like to have 1 or 2 more working group meetings, it would be easy to plan those and cancel them if you didn't need them. But it would be hard to put them on the calendar if you realized you needed them, you know, in January. So if we don't know with enough time, it takes about a month for us to schedule a public meeting like this. You know, sometimes it goes faster, but technically it can take a month for us to get the appropriate notices out for a public meeting or a working group meeting. So just sort of putting that out there as you guys consider the schedule, if you would want to just, you know, if you feel like you might want a little extra time after the 14th, it's totally fine with us. Yes, Thomas?
I was wondering, and there's a question to my fellow panel members, whether we need all day on the 14th or whether we should make that a 3-hour meeting from 3 to 6 like the other meetings.
We can always end early, but I would suggest keep it the way it is.
So I'm going to be in Japan. I will be 7 hours behind you. I will not be able to actually join you until about 1 p.m. on that day. That would be the earliest I can join. This would be the meeting on the 14th.
Mike, you have a comment?
Well, I think it's a good idea to have a few more meetings on the books, you know, because just in case we don't, I would like to finish, but if we don't finish, we would need to, you know, 1 or 2 more meetings. We don't have many working group meetings left, really, to get all these questions tightened up. And if we are going to review this whole new outline that Thomas has, that could take us in a completely different direction. You know, then we'd have to rewrite everything in a different way.
Anna, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was I think I agree with Michael that having some extra meetings on the book might be good, just because my calendar fills up far in advance, unfortunately. And also maybe just take stock of where we are and how much more we think we have to go, including the potential restructuring, but also just the content of the questions that, you know, some are in version, I've lost count with 1 and 2, but for the others, like version 2 and version 4, and so maybe just taking stock could be a good idea.
Ru?
Are we suggesting additional meetings within the current time frame or extending the time frame to allow for additional meetings?
I think ideally we'll probably keep the March 11 meeting as our last meeting, but we could schedule, let's say, 2 more meetings, the week of January 19th and the week of January 26th, for example.
I think it's good to get it on the calendar, and we can cancel it if we don't need it.
Yeah, and we can facilitate a poll and find out what's available, and we can look for 2 additional dates. And then we can bring this back to you next week. So you don't have to make any final decisions today, but it sounds like there is concurrence around just adding a couple more meetings after the January 14th. Does that sound good? And then we'll pull you guys, or we'll give you guys the dates that seem to work the best for everybody.
So the second half of January, schedule 2 meetings for the second half of January, or send out the poll to schedule 2 meetings.
Yes.
And then probably next time, Hannah, we can have a really good look at how much is left for the different questions, how much we need to discuss. Would that work for you?
Yeah, and then if next week you realize you want even 2 more after that, then you can let us know, and we can add them in. So that's easy. Okay,
By next time we've had a look at Thomas's suggestion on how to restructure it, and so then we can also have that discussion, and we'll have a better idea of how much work there would be to get there.
yeah. Yeah, and I'll be honest, it is a lot easier for us from a Beverly team perspective if we could share the outline quickly on the screen, and then we can email it to everybody right away. But otherwise, we'll have to figure out how best to get it to you, and it might take us a minute. So would you?
Go ahead.
Is that
Share
okay? Okay,
And Tina, here's a quick question to staff. Can we share comments on chat? Because I can also cut and paste that outline into the chat while you share it.
Oh, yeah, I think that,
I think it's,
can somebody, is Eric still on? I'll share
I
my,
can do it from my end. I have it in my
Yeah.
cell phone and I can
Thomas,
cut and paste it.
That's fine if you want to put that in the chat right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll do that.
and I have it up. So this is the alternative outline. And I don't think it needs to be discussed at length or anything. It's just to share it right now so everybody gets a chance to see it. And then we'll forward this email from Thomas to all the panel members so they can have it before the meeting next week where they may discuss it. Does that sound good?
Oh, it doesn't come
Yeah.
across formatted. It's just one big long snake.
It would be nice if
Sorry.
Erica could share it with everybody or send it out to
Yeah.
everybody.
Now we can forward this. Does anybody, Eric, are we good?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. Now we're ready, I think, to move on to, oh yeah, we would like to have this open to public comment. I'm sorry, this is taking a little longer than the agenda had indicated, but if we have anybody in the public that would like to comment on the charter, we are not voting on it today, but we do welcome we can do 5 minutes of comments if there's anybody in the audience that would like to comment. Any hands up?
Yep, no hands, looks like it.
Okay, then I think we can move on to our presenters.
Oh, sorry. My bad.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your time with that.
We have 2 presentations today. I think the presentations, I believe, are going to be kicked off by Ana Gomez and Sierra Cafienda. You should have the ability to unmute yourselves and share your screen.
Can you see my presentation now?
We sure can.
Perfect.
All right. Okay, great. You guys can hear me well too?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much for letting us talk today. My name is Sierra Castaneda, and I'm here with Ana Gomes, my colleague. We're 2 graduate students from Stanford University. And today we're going to explore how non-legume fall terminated cover crops might reduce nitrate nitrogen leaching and some potential implications to consider for the ag order. Our presentation is going to last about 10 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion and any questions that you might have or ideas that come up. So we can get right into it. So we're excited to share some data that we've been working on the past few years with Eric Brennan here as well. And we're going to start with an overview of the nitrogen cycle, just to get everyone on the same page. Then explain the timeline of a fall and a winter terminated cover crop system in the Salinas Valley. Then share the results from both a laboratory incubation and a field trial that we did. And we'll finish with some key takeaways to discuss. Next slide. Okay, perfect. So just to start, I am going to define some key key three processes that are really critical to the nitrogen cycle when talking about cover cropping. First, nitrogen mineralization is the conversion of organic nitrogen into ammonium, with immobilization being the reverse process of this, so going back from a plant available form into organic nitrogen. Secondly, since there's plenty of oxygen in most agricultural soils, another group of soil microorganisms convert the ammonium into nitrate, and this is called nitrification. Third, since the soil is negatively charged and nitrate is also negatively charged, it doesn't stick on the soil and is washed down the profile, either with irrigation or rainfall, and this is called nitrate leaching. So just keep these three things in mind as we're going about the presentation. So I'll say these a lot. So let's start with an overview of how we think about non-leguminous cover crops in the context of the Salinas Valley and the Central Coast as a whole. First, say a grower harvests their final cash crop of the season. This could be a broccoli or a lettuce, and the residues of that crop, along with the excess soil nitrogen, are left on the field. Then, prior to the rains in the winter, let's say a farmer plants a non-legume cover crop. This could be a rye or a triticale, two common cover crops in the valley. And so as that cover crop grows, it's going to scavenge or take up excess nitrogen from the soil in their roots and biomass and tying it up in the biomass of the plant tissue. And then once these cover crops are terminated, the residues are then incorporated into the soil to decompose, and the nitrogen mineralizes back into a plant available form. And so ideally, this process happens such that the next season cash crop, so the lettuce that's planted in the spring, can use this quote unquote recycled nitrogen from the cover crop residues, preventing it from being lost from the system and maybe even reducing the next season nitrogen inputs. So now I'm just going to briefly describe three possible management timelines to show when cover crops are used in the Central Coast. So first, which is the most common system used today, is a no cover crop or fallow system. This is kind of the business as usual. So after the final crop of the season is harvested, the field is then put into beds and left bare over the winter until the next season cash crop is planted the following spring. However, this leaves the soil bare over the main rainy season, and since there are no roots to take up excess nitrogen, the risk of mineralization, nitrification, and losses via nitrogen leaching is extremely high. So here's a more ideal system where a cover crop would be planted prior to the winter rains, usually around October, and grows over the winter, accumulating nitrogen in its biomass. And so decades ago, Dr. Louise Jackson from the UC Davis lab showed that winter cover crops can reduce nitrate leaching by up to 70%. However, this system can be difficult to manage because termination of winter cover crops can really complicate field preparation for farmers, and the planting of late winter and early spring crops could be delayed. So based on interest from growers, we explore here a third system, which is growing a non-legume cover crop over the fall period for a shorter period of time, around 60 days. And perhaps these fall terminated cover crops, in addition to winter cover crops, could also help to reduce nitrate leaching. We're going to explore how this might lead to an opportunity for fall terminated cover crops to get a partial credit in the ag order.
Thanks, Sierra. So this leads us to our main question guiding our research. Can fall non-legume cover crops help protect the groundwater by reducing nitrate leaching? Let's first start with our laboratory incubation. So this plot is from a 112-day laboratory incubation we conducted in the lab with rye residue from 4 different carbon to nitrogen ratios. So you can see that on the x-axis from 10:1 to 30:1. And the y-axis is the percent of that residue nitrogen that has mineralized by day 112, and across 3 different temperatures that are all relevant to the Salinas Valley. So we measured how quickly the residue mineralizes or releases its nitrogen from organic to inorganic nitrogen And we found that as the carbon to nitrogen ratio increases, the percentage of residue nitrogen mineralizes decreases, as you can see the large arrow on the plot. So in other words, as a cover crop matures and gets tougher or more carbon rich, less juicy, as Eric would like to say, there's less nitrogen that's released in 112 days. And you can see this QR code here on the screen leads you to the paper that we just got accepted in the Journal of Environmental Quality. And we're also working on a YouTube video for this paper. So the second plot that we'll show from the incubation, we just pulled out 2 of the residues that we studied, the 19:1 and 30:1, and that's the range that we found in our field trial as well. The red dashed line, horizontal line that you see here in the plot is actually the threshold between net nitrogen mineralization and immobilization. And the highest percentage nitrogen we found for the 2 residues were 20% or 40% of the residue nitrogen that was measured in the warmest conditions of 20 degrees Celsius. In the plot here, you can see the red arrow that the net mineralization of the 30:1 residue only happened at the warmer temperature. So the higher the temperature, the more mineralization happening. So while these are really insightful and incubations in general are insightful to think about dynamics of mineralization, we want to think about in the field how this might change. And in the incubation, you can see this picture on the bottom left. The residue is undisturbed for 112 days. And we know that's very different than what happens in the field situation. So in the field, we wanted to look at all different variables changing to see how they influence nitrogen mineralization of the cover crop residue, and therefore how much of the nitrogen is stored in the residue over the rainy season and what would be our risk of leaching.
So just to review, our field trial had 3 main treatments. On the left here, we had a fall terminated Merced rye cover crop that was planted mid-August and terminated mid-October. So it had about 60 days of growth. And those residues were incorporated in beds over the winter, so there was no roots growing. There was no cover crop growing over the winter, just the residues. In the center, we had an overwintered rye cover crop treatment that was planted mid-October and terminated at the beginning of March. And then lastly, on the right, we had a no cover crop treatment that was left in fallow beds and kept weed-free from mid-August until the planting of the spring lettuce crop in the spring. So here we're going to start with cover crop nitrogen uptake. So we found that in the fall terminated cover crop that was grown around 60 days, that cover crop took up just as much nitrogen as the winter cover crops in about half the time, because those winter cover crops grew for around 120 days over the winter. And this is really promising for fall terminated cover crops, showing that they have the ability to accumulate as much nitrogen in their biomass as winter cover crops, usually around 75 to 100 kilograms per hectare in half the time. And so one goal of this study was to track the changes of the C to N ratio for the fall terminated versus the winter cover crops. And as you can see on this plot here, both cover crops produced shoot residue that exceeded a C to N of 20:1. And it's important to grow the cover crop for long enough to maximize nitrogen uptake and then to dilute the nitrogen with carbon, which bumps up that C to N ratio, because this would slow the nitrogen release once the residue is incorporated into the soil. The shoot residue of both cover crops reach a C to N of 34:1 by the time they were terminated. So the green is the fall terminated and the red is the winter. While the incubation study showed reduced nitrogen mineralization of the residue, this mainly occurred at high C to N ratios. And it's important to note that in many cases, the C to N ratios of fall terminated cover crops in on-farm plantings in the Salinas Valley seldom reach or exceed a C to N of 20:1. And thus it's much lower than what we found in our study.
So our third set of data is the soil pore water data. We collected samples at 90 centimeter depth using suction lysimeters. The plot shows on the y-axis the number of samples that were collected for fall terminated cover crops on the left and the fallow on the right. The darker the blue, the cleaner the water sample compared to the orange, which represents the water samples with nitrate contamination concentrations up to or between 30 and 50 ppm nitrate nitrogen. So all 7 water samples in the across the main 4 rain events that happened last year, we took 7 samples in both treatments, and then in the fallow, all 7 water samples exceeded the drinking water standard for nitrate nitrogen of 10 ppm, whereas in the fall terminated cover crop, only 3 of the 7 samples exceeded this drinking water standard. So our 4th and final set of data is now our soil nitrate data. So also from 60 to 90 centimeters, so the deepest level of the soil that we measured. And this is consistent with our water samples. So this box plot shows all the nitrate nitrogen concentrations from August to May, so the complete duration of the field study, again, from the deepest soil measured. So the y-axis is nitrate nitrogen, and the x-axis are 3 treatments, where green is the fall terminated cover crop, blue is the fallow or no cover crop, and red is the winter cover crop. The lowercase a, b, and c above each treatment signify the statistical numbers and show that those treatments had different concentrations. So fallow has the highest soil nitrate, fall cover crops intermediate, and winter cover crops are the lowest. The black horizontal line that you see is again at 10 ppm, and we know that this is soil data, not necessarily what would be in the water itself, but it gives you a reference point. So as you can see, there were only 1 sample above this line for the winter cover crops compared to many samples for the fallow and a few for the fall terminated treatment. Year 2, which is what this data, the last 4 plots we've shown you, has come from, was really a best case scenario for field trial where rainfall was below average, and we were able to keep our fallow plots weed free using a flame weeder instead of a cultivator, which reduced disturbance. In this year of our experiment, we found that the fall terminated cover crops did have lower nitrate nitrogen than the fallow at depth. However, now we'll show you 2 additional fields that we also took soil samples from. And here's the small plot that I just showed you from the last slide, with the fall cover crops having lower soil nitrate than the fallow. Now we added a second plot. This is the first year of our organic field trial that Sierra earlier described, and we found that the fall terminated cover crop plots actually had a higher nitrate at depth than the fallow, as you can see by the different lowercase letters above the plots, indicating the statistical differences. And third, this is a plot from a 1-year conventional trial we did also in the Salinas Valley. And we found that fall terminated cover crops and the fallow plots didn't have statistically different soil nitrate concentrations at depth. Again, the x-axis of all 3 plots have different scales, indicating different concentration ranges of nitrate. And as a reminder, the black horizontal lines are a reference, so you can see for the 3 fields. So to really reiterate our point, all 3 fields have different results for the soil 60 to 90 centimeter nitrate concentrations.
So to answer our main question, can these non-legume fall terminated cover crops reduce nitrate leaching? Looking at the 4 plots that we just showed you for the 2nd year of our field trial that showed nitrogen uptake, C to N ratio, soil and pore water nitrogen concentrations, both at depth, we can conclude that in some cases, yes, but we want to be really cautious for a number of reasons. Firstly, we only have 1 year of field data from the 2nd year of our field trial that supports this. Our first year had many challenges with winter management of the winter fallow beds. And so for simplicity, we didn't get into that data. Additionally, the nitrogen loads of some conventional farm soils that Anna just showed, we measured 10 times higher nitrate concentrations than the organic study that we did. And so those high nitrogen levels would greatly exceed what a cover crop could potentially take up. Secondly, the C to N ratios of fall terminated cover crops in our organic field study were much higher, like I said, around 34 to 1 than typical levels on farms, usually less than 20 to 1. With fall terminated cover crops, the high C to N ratios are really, really important to show slow nitrogen mineralization during the winter. And it's unknown how consistently we can get the fall terminated C to N ratio up that high. And lastly, while incubation studies help us understand the nitrogen mineralization dynamics, they might underestimate mineralization rates in a real-world field condition because you have fall and winter tillage that would likely increase mineralization rates under variable moisture. So in summary, while some of our data indicates that fall terminated cover crops can reduce nitrate leaching, we believe that more research is needed to better understand the nitrogen dynamics of this cover cropping research. And with that, we will conclude our presentation, and we look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. If anybody from the panel has questions for Sierra or Anna, just unmute yourselves or raise your hand. I'm seeing no questions, so I think if Eric is ready, we can move on to our next presentation.
We can also discuss together with Eric.
Yeah, and I'll share I should share my screen now.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, can you all see my screen there?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to address this question of whether or not cover crop mixtures of legumes and non-legumes can reduce nitrate leaching and therefore protect groundwater quality in California. And here's just a brief outline of what I'm going to cover. So first I'll answer the question, then I'll provide some references that support my answer.
Hi, Eric. So sorry, just wanted to let you know that your mic is a little difficult to understand. Sounds a little muffled.
Okay, hold on just a minute. Let me switch to another one. In just a minute.
Oh yeah, that's wonderful.
Hang on. Mic video setting, hold on. Okay, is that better now?
Yes, that's great.
Problem is I can't hear you. Hold on. Shoot. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me better. Okay, great. When it's time for me to hear you, I'm going to switch to a different mic. Okay, so back to the outline here. So I'll answer the question, then I'll provide some references that I use to answer or to support my answer. And then I'm going to go through some of the biology and the dynamics of these mixtures of legumes and non-legumes, using some examples from long-term research that I've been involved with here in Salinas. And then lastly, I'll talk about some of the practical implications that this would have for nitrate leaching. So what types of cover crops can reduce nitrate leaching? A few weeks ago, right before the government shutdown, I gave a presentation to the expert panel and I answered the question about non-legume winter cover crops. Definitely they can help us with nitrate leaching. They're a best management practice. They're really the gold standard. Fall terminated cover crops that Sierra and Anna just talked about, there's some promise, but the data is still unclear. We need a lot more field studies, in my opinion, to answer this question carefully. And what I'm going to talk about now is these non-legume legume mixtures. And I would say the answer is yes, they can reduce nitrate leaching. And let me show you some references that I used to come to that conclusion. So over the past several years, there have been two main meta-analyses, one in 2018, one in 2022, that looked at nitrate leaching. And many of these included a legume non-legume mix compared with a pure non-legume. And they basically, both of them concluded that nitrate leaching was very similarly reduced in these mixtures versus pure non-legumes. So that's encouraging data. There's also a lot of individual studies, some of which were missed by the meta-analyses, that have provided a lot of other good information on this and helped me to be very confident that there's a lot of evidence that these these non-legume legume mixtures can really help with reducing leaching. I'm going to show you a little bit of data just from one study that happened in 2001. This is about when I started working on cover crops in California. And this is a study out of Europe. And so what we've got here is soil nitrate levels in the top 1 meter. And this is after the cover crops had been grown for several weeks, actually about 3 weeks or about 3 months or so. And you can see the fallow system with no cover crop, the nitrate levels in the top, the top 50 centimeters and the bottom 50 centimeters are both quite high. Now let's compare that with what happened where we grew rye. You can see the rye cover crop reduced that immensely, which would provide a lot of evidence that the risk of leaching is much more reduced there. And the rye vetch mixture was very similar to rye on its own. And if you just grew pure vetch, the risk is not, or the leaching reduction would not be as great. So rye and the legume rye mixtures were very similar in this study. Now let me talk a little bit about some of the dynamics and biology of these mixtures. I'm going to use some data from our long-term study here in Salinas, but before I do that, I want to take you on a little bit of a trip. I figured it's Friday, why not go to the tropics and see a little different environment? So we're going to go to the Big Island of Hawaii, to the Hamakua coast. It's an area where I've been involved with some different land management issues for several years. And this is during the government shutdown. I went back to this site where I had planted a legume grass mixture 34 years ago. And I'm standing in front of one of the legumes here. This is a leguminous tree, and you can see all the grass growing in the background. So what's interesting about this is here the trees are dominating. But there's another part of the same property where the grass is. In this case, it's bamboo is actually dominating the mix. So I often think about those kind of environments when I'm under the cover crops in Salinas, picking up weed seeds and collecting soil organic matter and biomass samples and all these things. I think back to the tropics and how these are complex systems here as well as there. And what I'm trying to get at is that mixtures of legumes and non-legumes, they're diverse, they come in many shapes and sizes, and they're extremely interesting. They all have a few things in common, though. They've got nitrogen scavengers, like in this case rye, and there are nitrogen fixers, like the vetch. The nitrogen scavengers we would call catch crops. So we often call them cover crops, but they're also a real more technical term is a catch crop. It catches the nitrogen before it leaches out of the root zone. Whereas the legume component is really a green manure cover crop because that's providing nitrogen fixation and actually helping to kind of mellow out the non-legume. And that happens because of the nodules where nitrogen fixation occurs on the legume component. And you can see how different the root systems of these two are. In California, most of our mixtures have about 10%, maybe up to 50% non-legume component, but the rest is actually legumes. And I'll show you a few pictures of different mixtures that I've worked with. Here's one of rye and purple vetch. And this is a more diverse one where you've got rye, 10% of the mixture in terms of seed weight mixed with several different legumes. These legume cereal mixtures tend to be more common on small to medium scale farms, especially organic farms in the Central Coast region. And that's a lot of my work is in those types of systems, and so that's where I've seen them quite often. I'm going to go through a little bit of the advantages and disadvantages of these mixtures. So one of the obvious advantages is they fix nitrogen. They can add nitrogen to the system. And they do that through those nodules in the roots. Here's some data from our long-term study. So this is the average over 8 years of rye shoot nitrogen uptake. So shoot nitrogen uptake on the y-axis. And you can see for rye, the shoot nitrogen uptake in December is just about maxed out. This is a cover crop planted in October to early November, but it maxes out in around, say, January and doesn't change much from then. Whereas in the mixture, the increase in rye, or there's a constant increase actually in the nitrogen uptake by the rye. The rye is a little bit behind the rye is in a pure system, but at the end we get much more nitrogen in the shoot biomass, and that's because we estimate about 50 kilograms per hectare of this total amount was fixed by the legume. That's right. So this is one of the reasons that some growers like to use these cover crops, these mixtures, is because you can actually add nitrogen to your system and hopefully then reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizers that one would need. Now, another very big benefit of them is that it reduces the carbon to nitrogen ratio of that mixture. It mellows out the non-legume. And here's some data from the same study, and you can see the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the rye increases quite quickly. So by the end of the season, it's up around 30. But let's look at rye in the mixture. That ratio, it goes up, but it never gets as high as it would on its own in a pure system. So basically, the legume component here is helping to mellow out or reduce the C to N ratio of the mixture. And that mixture C to N ratio does reach 20 or a little more, but it never gets overly high. And so that actually can really help with nitrogen release into the next crop, as well as reducing issues with immobilization. And that can help with growing vegetables in these systems. Here's a head of lettuce, a small one in one hand, where a cover crop was not grown, and the one that's bigger is where a legume rye cover crop was grown. And this is just a snippet of data showing you that averaged over 8 years, where we didn't very often grow a cover crop, the yields tend to be lowest. Where we grew a legume rye mix with the same fertilizers, they were the highest, and they were similarly high where we grew just pure rye, but a little bit below what they would be if we had the mixture. So that just shows you one of the benefits of these legume cereal mixture systems. Another really important advantage is these mixtures they're flexible and they self-adjust. And I'm going to show you some data. So this is from the same study. This is the rye biomass in this legume rye mixture. And look at how much it changes over time, over the years. So some years it's quite high. This is just the rye component. Other years it's quite low. And the reason for that is that these mixtures adjust based on the field conditions, the rainfall, the temperature, the leftover soil nitrogen. And so that's one of the main benefits of them, is that they are flexible. This shows you the percentage of rye biomass. Oops, let me back up there. So the percentage can change. Here it's 90% of the mixture was rye in year 1. In year 7, it was only 44%. Now, the reason that change is happening is because of variable conditions from one year to the next. And this is an example of what can happen. So here's a field after strawberries where we had planted a pure cereal cover crop. And you see we've got these areas with very low nitrogen left over. And then over here it's high. So this cover crop will always be variable. And that's a bit of a challenge because when you come in to incorporate this residue, it's not going to be very uniform. If you not like them, and that's partially because the legume cost is so high and they have to be planted at higher seeding rates. Another issue is they tend to be very poor weed suppressors. So if you don't plant them at a high enough seeding rate, even what we used to think was a standard rate, you're going to have a lot of problems with weeds. And then another issue is there is some evidence that they can increase some soil-borne diseases. So there are disadvantages of these. But in many cases, they are a good fit for certain situations. I would say in many parts of the Salinas Valley with excessive nitrogen left over at the end of the season, a mixture like this probably is not the best fit. But in other cases, they may be. A few years ago, I made a video questioning this issue of whether or not legume cereal mixtures are a good fit. You might want to check that out when you have time. But I want to just quickly conclude here with some practical implications for nitrate leaching reduction. So I hope I've shown you convincing information that these mixtures can reduce nitrate leaching. And because of that, I think that these mixtures should receive a nitrogen scavenging credit for nitrogen uptake in the non-legume component of the mix. Similarly to what was in the ag order for cover crop nitrogen scavenging credit for non-legumes, I think we should give a similar or same type of credit to the non-legume component of these mixtures. But I also want to mention that it's important that I think we would not want to penalize nitrogen input from biological fixation by these legumes. So I think giving the credit for the cereal component is good, but don't penalize the legume component. Anyway, that's my presentation. I just wanted to say I'm here to help. I've got a lot of other ideas on different parts of the ag order and the cover crop component and how it can help. So happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Does anybody from the panel? Oh, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, Anna, Sierra, for all the presentations. Very nice. Question for you, Eric, right off. If you're in a situation with high nitrate soil, right? Not maybe in your organic system, but in a conventional system at the end of the season, wouldn't these legumes not fix nitrogen, just take up the nitrogen?
So an excellent question. Yeah, so I've done quite a few studies where we've looked at legume cereal mixtures in different types of fields. And what will happen is if you have a lot of nitrogen, the legumes will take up some of that nitrogen, but actually the legume will be outcompeted by the non-legume. And so you'll actually have wasted all that legume seed. So in a situation like that, it would actually be a waste of money to plant the legume cereal mixture. It'd be much better to just plant a non-legume. The legumes can't handle competition from a cereal in a situation where the nitrogen levels are extremely high or in situations where there is, say, a real long drought. So legumes are not good competitors with cereals unless tends to be lower nitrogen and ample moisture. So in most cases in Salinas, I would suggest most growers that have excessive nitrogen should actually just be growing pure cereals or pure, say, mustard, other non-legumes.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if Sierra and you could put up that slide where it showed.
Let me stop sharing here.
Yeah, where you were showing that for the second year, sort of the soil nitrate values that you had, and where it shows that fall cover crop was reducing it as much as the winter cover crop. I guess my question is, when did you evaluate that? That's at the end of the winter?
And then Sarah, can you hear Michael's question? Oh, there we go.
You're talking about this slide here?
Yes.
Yeah, so
This is actually all of the nitrate samples that we took throughout the entire year from August to May. This is our second year.
Oh, okay.
So this was all the nitrate analysis from the soil samples. And they started at the same nitrate level in August when the treatments were established.
Okay, so the no cover crop one, it just seems like it had higher levels. Oh, this is deep in the soil, right?
Yeah, this is 60 to 90 centimeters.
Right. Okay, I just wondered if it could be also if you infiltrate more water in the cover crop areas compared to the no cover crop fallow areas, would you end up with just lower nitrate values because you had more leaching there?
So year 2 was a drier year. We had about half the water moving through the profile than we did the first year. However, yes, thinking through the water movement down the profile does matter essentially. This is back calculated to per gram of dry soil. So all 3 treatments are normalized for soil moisture. But yes, the pattern of water movement down the profile would matter. It was interesting though to note that since the fall cover crops are irrigated, they actually started the rainy season wetter than the fallow plots did. And we have a bunch of moisture data because we buried sensors as well in all of the plots. So despite the fact that the fallow started drier, it still had more nitrate at depth than the fall cover cropped or the winter cover cropped plots. And also maybe to answer the second part of your question, which is thinking about like if like maybe there was just more, like it had gone past 90 centimeters is maybe what you're thinking, that we wouldn't have captured it. Here we did sample essentially every 2 weeks when there was water flowing. So we continuously sampled the soil to capture that water movement to make sure that we were capturing the nitrate as it moved through the profile. If either of those answer your train of thought, yeah.
I imagine you have some profile data that would show sort of how the pulse of nitrogen might move over the course of the season.
Just for the sake of time, Michael.
Let me let other people.
But yeah, we have a ton of soil moisture sensor data, and also obviously all the rainfall, evapotranspiration, all the water dynamic data. We also have pore water data and soil data that we're working to now combine to look at how can we calculate leaching beyond what's in the soil.
Thank you. We have 3 more panelists with their hands up. So next we'll go to Voodoo.
Thank you, Sarah, Anna, and Eric. Great presentation. My question is really quick. Anna and Sarah, for your trials, were those mostly organic farms fields? I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, so we did, our main field trial was at the USDA organic research farm that Eric manages. So that wasn't on an organic farm. However, we did do 1 year this past year on a conventional farm, kind of a mini version of our 2-year field trial. And that's what we had mentioned earlier, that the nitrogen loads in those conventional systems have around 10 times higher the soil nitrogen levels than we found in the organic system. So that's a cautionary tale for fall cover crops, or really any cover crop, because of cover crops have this max potential of the amount of nitrogen that they can take up. And if the soil loading nitrogen exceeds that, you might still have leaching.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next on Anna.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, Anna, and Eric, for your presentations. I had a couple questions, or maybe a request, just to see that nitrate data by depth and over time. I think could get at Michael's question about those dynamics. It would be great to see that. And then I was just wondering for all of you, like, and you sort of touched on this a bit, but how robust are these results over different water years that we have?
This is one of the main reasons I would like to have a lot more. Hold on just a minute. Can you hear me okay there? If I get close to my mic. So this is one of the main reasons why I would like to have a lot more years of field data on this fall cover crop approach, because I would say our data is not adequate to make firm conclusions yet for the fall cover crops.
Okay.
Fall terminated.
And it seemed like for the legume and rye mixtures, though, that because of that sort of adjusting behavior, that might be more robust too.
Yeah, the legume rye mixture data is very robust. It's based on 8 years of data that I've collected, but it's also based on studies in multiple other regions of the world and different types of cropping systems. So that's very robust data. I'm not worried at all about that data.
Thank you.
Can I add something really quick?
Sorry, never mind.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, yeah. So, and yeah, just to clarify, so the difference in rain obviously matters because then whatever nitrogen is in the soil that's released from the cover crop residue in the fall, cover crops will be at risk of bleaching. And that's something we're trying to explore more, thinking about like comparing the laboratory incubation to what we found in the field. Because even if we know the risk of how much residue is released or nitrogen is released, ideally, if no nitrogen is released, then it doesn't matter how much rainfall is coming through. But we do think that because we've seen variable patterns, that there is an effect of the tillage in the field that needs to be understood a bit more before we say confidently how much of the residue nitrogen would be by risk.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, I had a question for Eric. We earlier discussed this sort of dichotomy, thinking of what data are collected and reported as something that also informs the grower and gives the grower credits for things that we want the grower to do, and not credits for things that we don't want the grower to do. And then on the other hand, there's sort of this more groundwater looking view where you look at the whole nitrogen balance, which is that's part of the approach in the Central Valley, is to really look at these groundwater nitrogen data, and sort of the full nitrogen cycle. My question to you is from a grower's perspective, is there a preference in terms of, you have this Central Coast system where you get credits, and you mentioned you want the credits given for scavenging from these mixed winter cover crops, and so you have this system of credits for things that we want growers to do. In the Central Valley, we don't have that. In the Central Valley, we do essentially a full nitrogen cycling accounting. So people that do a cover crop don't get any credits. That cover crop nitrogen is assumed to go into the crop and then worked back into the soil, so it's like available in the following year, and it's being accounted for. Where the growers ultimately get their credit for is when they then also apply less nitrogen in the following year, because they have this extra nitrogen from the cover crop. They have in balance, they're actually in a better balance than they would be without the cover crop, right? Do you see an advantage to one approach or another? I mean, either way we're getting growers with the right information, we're getting growers to do the right things to do.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Can you hear me okay, Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good question. One of the challenges, I think, in the Salinas systems is that you can grow a cover crop and you may not see the benefit of it in your next vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, no, we did see that in other words, like in our long-term study, we did see definite benefits. Where we grew a cover crop, we had higher yields. And so we theoretically could have applied less nitrogen. And so over time, you'd think, yeah, you're gonna see that benefit, but it's not always the case. That's where it's challenging, is sometimes, especially with these non-legume cover crops, the cycling of that nitrogen back to the subsequent crop is not always as clean as what we'd hope to see. Perhaps if there was less, if the systems were not, overloaded with nitrogen, how they often are, we would see more consistent benefits. But it's a hard question. I think the growers did appreciate having a credit given for a good practice. But I can also see how the other system, could be very workable too. And it's very hard to try to figure out what is the best way to do this, to incentivize it. Like the credits that were given were based on certain things such as biomass. So there had to be a certain biomass level, 4,500 pounds of chute biomass oven dry per acre. I actually now don't agree that there should be a biomass requirement like that. I think the credit should be just based on the nitrogen uptake of the cover crop. And if it's low uptake, then you get a low credit. If it's high uptake, then you get a high credit. But having like a threshold biomass level, I don't think is a good idea. I do think the C to N ratio part makes a lot of sense because that's going to slow mineralization and slow release back to potentially leach. So it's, this has been a very exciting time to be a cover crop researcher, but it's also a time when I realize that there's a lot of unknowns. And so trying to come up with ways that we can incentivize these good practices in a way that's, consistent with what the grower is doing is really good. If you do more, you should get more credit, it seems like. At least to me. That's why I actually really like the structure in general of the Central Coast approach. And I was pretty shocked when it was, now we're back at square one again, trying to get them back in. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, next, I think I saw Ruth's hand up, and then Ruth, if you want to ask any questions you have, and then we can conclude this portion of our agenda.
Just a really quick question. So the requirements for a certain amount of biomass, how were those enforced, or how are those reported or measured?
So right after the ag order was passed, Richard and I were asked by the Leafy Greens Research Board to come up with a way to estimate biomass so that the growers could easily determine their shoe biomass requirement. And we did come up with a very simple method that they could just measure the stem length, and then they would have an estimate. And that was quite robust. So that's how we dealt with that issue. It was pretty simple. And the carbon to nitrogen ratio requirement to get the maximum credit, we also came up with a way to use plant developmental stage, like whether or not the plant is heading out or in, say, the vegetative stage. We could pretty accurately estimate the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and that's how you could meet both the biomass requirement as well as the C to N ratio requirement. And once you get the biomass one, then you could do a calculation, and you could, with the C to N, and you could calculate your nitrogen uptake and then your credit.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Sarah. It was a great presentation. We actually have received some interest to share your slides, so we'll follow up with you after if you are all open to it, to get copies of all of your slides from today. So next, we will go into public comment. We are running a little behind schedule, so we will go a little over schedule today. And so first, we will start with Sarah Lopez.
Okay. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I was, good evening, everyone. I was just approved to give a more detailed presentation on this on the 17th, but since so many of the issues came up today, I just wanted to speak briefly to them now, particularly some of Dr. Harder's comments. So I heard a lot of references to the Region 5 kind of entire approach to irrigation and nutrient management. I heard it referred to as the SWAT model approach. And I think that can be a little bit misleading because the Region 5 approach is really an entire system of tools involving SWAT, which is a surface model, not a hydrogeologic model, NPSAT, which is a subsurface model, and multiple subterranean true hydrogeologic models. And then that system further involves the consideration of landscape processes and an outreach approach that's based on targets
some of which are based on what's truly protective of groundwater quality, and then some of which are based on agronomic considerations. Because if you're reducing nitrogen loading and you're using an agronomically based target because that's what speaks best to growers to start out with, and you're reducing nitrogen loading, the groundwater receives the same benefit as if that target had been set based on groundwater quality considerations. And either way, you're achieving a reduction in nitrogen loading. So the system of models and really the entire system of the Region 5 approach gives us several things that are relevant to today's discussion. It gives us the SWAP model component alone. All that gives us is a value with a capital V that is more or less the true nitrogen discharge from the root zone. And that comes from grower reported data and the SWAP model. And it's inclusive of more terms or factors than the Central Coast A-R equation. But those additional terms or factors are often very small relative to the factors in the A-R equation. Like they're 2% sometimes, like gaseous losses, like denitrification, 1%, 2% if we're talking about a very short Central Coast crop root zone. Then another thing I want to mention is on the Central Coast, the A-R equations output gives us something close to a true discharge. And the Central Coast Water Board actually calls this the discharge without qualification. But as Dr. Harder pointed out, there are some nuanced ways in which it departs from a true mass balance. And I just want to say that this equation really cannot be both things at once. And it could be that we're looking at a need for two things, because I think the concerns about, cover crops and not wanting to incentivize people to take their high nitrate wells out of service, those are very real things. I see my time is coming to an end here. And it's like we need two things. We need one thing to help with the outreach and the management, and then we need something that also tells us what's protective of groundwater quality. And I have more to say, but I'll hold off till the 17th. And good luck to you all as you continue revising the draft.
Thank you. And next we have G. Ludwig. Sorry if I don't know your first name.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Ludwig with the Almond Board of California. And again, always really interesting conversation here. Couple of things just wanted to comment on. So just supporting the commenter just now that I think, as I mentioned before, and as has come up in this conversation, we really need to think about what are the relevant metrics for growers and helping them do better versus what are the relevant metrics to be able to model what's going into the groundwater, which again, those are closely related, but not 100% identical and again, we've been hearing in the conversation. So as you look at the questions you've asked from the State Water Board, is really thinking about how do we, incentivize growers to do the right thing and what's relevant there. And I think also, so the other thing is I actually like what Thomas said about having definitions, because I can tell you there are certain things that get said that from a farmer, it has a certain meaning from an agronomic term, but in the regulatory world has a slightly different meaning. And so I think being very clear about what's there, having that nitrogen cycle about what growers can and can't control is also, I think, useful just as a big framing up of where this conversation is. In the conversation today, there's been conversation about, and this is really the nub of the question, is to what extent do you set limits of application versus targets and so forth. I come back and say it is really, really difficult to set limits for applications. In the diversity of crops grown in California, there are really different amounts of nitrogen applied. I happen to work for a crop that uses a lot of nitrogen. It's high protein. Same time, different crops have very different amounts of how much nitrogen they can use. So agronomically, we speak nitrogen use efficiency. In the ILRP world, we talk about A-R. And so I think it's very, very difficult to say an application limit, because that's just agronomically does not make a lot of sense. But again, coming back to that, really thinking hard about what of this is really relevant for growers to do better, and what of this is relevant for for whether it's the regional water boards or the state water board to really get a good idea of, are we moving in the right direction, reducing the nitrate loading from a modeling perspective. I think the other thing, and that's coming up in the conversation we're just having right now with Eric Brennan and the Stanford folks, is currently neither the models or the assessments used for the growing side nor the models used for the groundwater leaching side, at least in the Central Valley, do a really good job of looking at practices that increase organic matter in the soil, which increases water holding capacity, which typically reduces nitrate leaching. The cover crops, you're talking about scavenging, but you also have, so for example, there's a paper from Whole Orchard Recycling showing that having that organic matter input over time reduces the soil's chances of not leaching that nitrate. And again, we don't currently have good ways of accounting for that in our systems. And yet, if we talk about all the healthy soils practices, that's what we're asking to focus on. So how do we capture that? Yeah, so that's just it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just a reminder, if you want to provide a comment, you can use the raise your hand function. Next, we have Nat Kane.
Hello, everyone. This is Nathaniel Kane with the Environmental Law Foundation. I really want to thank the panelists and board staff for continuing to work incredibly hard on this panel. It's been a long road, a long way to go. Really quickly, I really was encouraged by some of the conversation earlier today about setting interim limits based on percentiles. I think that the conversation was really productive. I like a lot of the stuff I heard during that presentation. I wanted to point out one aspect of that, which is that under the non-point source policy and the decisions and state board orders that have interpreted that policy, there needs to be a schedule for final compliance. There's a requirement to set a goal and then to set a quantifiable schedule with milestones to achieve that goal. Now, that can be adjusted over time. The boards can always say, hey, this isn't working, we need more time, or, we said it too slowly, we need less time, we need to speed it up. That can always happen. But there needs to be a schedule to get to the goal. And the courts have been very clear that if that's not there, then that's not a legal permit. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't want the panel to suggest something that just isn't possible to do under the law. Also on that idea of interim limits based on percentiles, it's really important to have acreage data to know what effect restricting those percentiles is going to have on discharge. Because if the problem for a certain crop or a certain area is just a couple bad apples, the top 90th percentile is really, that's all the discharge, then setting a discharge limit at the 85th percentile is going to really solve the problem. But if it's the case that the mean grower is discharging at extremely high rates, then setting a limit at the 80th percentile is going to have much less of an effect. We have that data in the Central Coast, but currently in the Central Valley, we're flying blind as to making those decisions. We just don't know. And that's why the coalition that I'm a part of, the Environmental Law Foundation is a part of, has requested that acreage data. And we really hope that the board and that the panel moves forward on securing that data and understanding the importance of that data. That's all I have. Thank you again. Happy Friday.
Thank you, Nat. I appreciate it. Appreciate all the comments today and the panelists. I do not see any more hands raised. So we're only 6 minutes over. I think at that will conclude this meeting and we will see you all on the 12th. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.